If you're trying to hit the 645 and you want to go to an M7 school or a top school in Europe and you really need this score to be admitted or to get a scholarship, this video is for you. And it's related to how you use this information in using the official material. Now, there's not a lot of official material if you're starting off maybe somewhere over here and you want to go to the 645. There's not a lot of material. It seems like there is, but there isn't. So for example, you have these guides, okay? These are the extra guides. There's this really big guide. I'm sure you've seen this, maybe you have a copy. And even though it says here there are 1,000 questions, it's not a lot. It's not a lot of questions to go, if you're starting off maybe over here or an average score, to go all the way here. Because there are 1,000 questions, but they're split across different topics. They're split across different types of questions. And so to really use these most effectively, you have to already possess this thing that I call autonomy. So when you're solving a question, a GMAT question, whether it's problem solving, data sufficiency, reading comprehension, critical reasoning, any of the data insights questions, you need to be extremely autonomous as you solve these questions under timed conditions, either solving them or when you're correcting your mistakes. And you're looking at an answer choice, the one that you chose that was maybe incorrect, and you should be able to realize relatively quickly by looking at a solution or on your own, okay, I understand why I'm wrong. Now I understand what is the correct answer choice. That is what I call autonomy. When you're solving an equation, you don't have to really think about why you use certain rules. If you're reading a paragraph of critical reasoning and you're immediately or almost immediately able to understand, okay, this is the premise, this is the conclusion, being familiar with all the terms, that is what I call autonomy. So if you don't already have that when you start to prepare, then you should be very cautious in how you use this material, because this official material, it is not to learn the content, but it is to frame whatever skill set that you have within the context of a GMAT exam. Okay? It is to frame what you know, it is to frame your skill set that you already have in the context of a GMAT test. That is what you use this material for. So if you don't have that level of autonomy and you start solving a lot of these questions and you finish the guides, you finish the extra guides, you finish the mock tests, and you're not really making any meaningful change to how you approach these questions, you're not acquiring the right skills that you should be able to apply under time conditions, then you're not going to extract the most value out of these resources. It's going to be the same for the mock tests. So that is going to be a real waste. And you get to a point where perhaps you're still stuck on a certain score and you think, I just have no more material to really practice under time conditions to make progress. So what do? How are you supposed to use these resources, and how are you supposed to plan how you actually use them throughout your preparation phase based on these two charts? This is what I'm going to explain to you right now. Okay, so let me talk first about these charts and how they relate to the video. Now, if you're in this score range and you want to hit a 645, it's probably going to take you 6 months to 8 months, maybe a little bit more. That is not unusual. And so when you do that, you have to be really careful. As I said earlier, there's this idea of autonomy. So if you're scoring in this range, maybe a little bit less, a little bit more, it means that you're not entirely autonomous when you're solving questions. So there are a lot of basics, a lot of either foundations of how you solve a linear equation, maybe mental math. You're not really good at modeling, and by that I mean reading a question that is really long and then translating that into an equation, establishing a relation. So that's modeling, describing words with mathematical equations. So if you're not really good at that and your goal is to achieve a 645, you have to hold off on using the official material. If maybe in reading comprehension or critical reasoning, you struggle to read the words, understand, identify a structure, you struggle with identifying or being able to recognize a certain context, you struggle with eliminating the incorrect answer choices using very specific reasons, choosing the ones using specific reasons, and again, you look at the explanations and you think, I just don't understand, or I don't know why, or why are they doing it this way, why don't they do it that way? So if you're there, that is going to be reflected in that score that you see over here. And when that is the case and you want to hit a 645, you have to be extremely cautious in how you use the material, and you probably have to hold off using it. Now, let's say that you're here and you want to hit a 645. As I said earlier, it's going to take you about 6 to 8 months. But what I want you to remember is the following. And look at this graph. So the longer that you need to hit a certain score, and that is based on a lot of factors, the primary factor is your starting point. Who you are as a person right now based on what you've done in your past life. Did you do a lot of math in high school? Did you do a lot of reading? What did you study in university? What kind of work experience you had? That is really the greatest factor that determines your starting point. And that is the greatest factor that determines how easy your preparation is going to be. So if that is your starting point, you're over here, it's going to take you at least 6 months, maybe 8 months, maybe a little more. And the reason is the following. So the longer it takes, the more time you need to spend to acquire certain skills that allow you to be autonomous as you are solving these questions. So if you have to think very long about the rules of linear equations, if you have to think very long about how to multiply two numbers, if you have to think for very long about work rate time and how that is used to model a certain situation, then you need to spend a lot of time acquiring those skills. And the idea is you need to be able to use these skills almost unconsciously. Otherwise, you're not fast enough. It's too slow for the test. Because in the exam, let's look at quant for the sake of argument, you have on average 2 minutes per question. But think, you need to read 50 words, 100 words, and then you need to understand what they're saying, and almost simultaneously you have to translate that into an equation and plan of action and then execute. All of that in the span of 2 minutes. Now that is really fast, and the implication is the following. If the skills required to do that are not assimilated already, it's going to take you a lot of repetition to actually arrive at the point where you can use those skills almost on autopilot. And that repetition does not have the same effect or return on investment of effort that it would have if you had done it during your adolescence. So now that you're older, it takes more time to actually acquire these skills. For these skills to be fluid, you need to spend more time. So when I say you need about 6 months to prepare or 8 months to prepare, and then anyways, the odds of achieving the score that you want they drop. The longer that you need is because of that. It takes a lot of time and a lot of repetition to actually be able to acquire those skills in order that you are able to summon them and apply them under time conditions. And again, the idea is that it has to be on autopilot. You have to be almost able to do it without thinking about it. And so that is why the longer that it takes you to prepare, it becomes a lot harder to hit that score. And as you can see here, it just falls off, and it begins to fall off exponentially. And this over here is just it's a funny zone, because it describes the following problem. Some students say, I don't know what's going on. I take a mock test, I get a 645, and then I take a real test, I get a 585. I sometimes do really well. On a different day, I do very poorly. I just don't understand why. The mock tests, I did them under time conditions as if it were the real test, and then I went on the day of the test and I totally bombed it, and it just didn't go well. I just don't know what's going on. What's going on is this. You're in this zone over here where you've improved, but you haven't entirely assimilated everything that is required to be able to function consistently under time conditions and hit that score more often than not. And the reason is what I said earlier. You had not assimilated those skills when you were younger. You're trying to do it now as an adult, and it requires a little bit of maybe luck and voodoo. And that's why it's a little strange in this zone. And so if you're in this zone, you want to be extremely careful in how you use the official material. Because if you waste it, you're in a lot of trouble. Because how do you actually now prepare under time conditions? And again, as I told you earlier, these guides, they are not to learn, they are to apply. They're kind of like exercises that you're performing, and they are simulations for the actual test, but in smaller sets. That's how you have to approach them. Therefore, what is the point of this video? If you're in this spot over here and you feel like you're just going back and forth and you're hovering, And if you feel like you're in this zone and you think one day I do so well, the other day I don't, it is because you haven't mastered those skills that I'm talking about. And they require a lot of repetition until they are on autopilot. And when they are on autopilot, then you can go back and solve some more questions. And then maybe you take another practice test only when you've increased the level of your autonomy. So be very careful how you use this official material. If you're in that place and you're not really sure how to proceed, if you feel like you've been preparing for a while, you used some resources, some mock tests, you've done the real test a few times, and you haven't really been consistent and you haven't made progress, reach out to a tutor that will help you understand what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, how can you actually acquire the skills required to perform really well, and how can you rehearse them enough and using what different resources, not the official resources, until you improve that level of autonomy where you can solve almost on autopilot, summoning those skills required without thinking about them. And then once you've actually achieved that and you've actually improved, then you'll go back to framing your new skill set, framing your knowledge within the context of an official GMAT question using the official resources, and then maybe take the mock test or the real test. So the long story in very few words is the following. If you're here and you're moving back and forth, it is not unusual. There are things that can be done, and if you're struggling, feel free to comment below with your questions or reach out on my website. Good luck.